And good evening to our fellow listeners and followers. Tonight is Sunday, April 7th at 8:31 p.m. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. In tonight's episode will be two segments. The High Court's playing politics with immigration and Texas's Senate Bill 4. And Governor of Florida acts like the parents, taking control away from the actual parents and new social media censorship law. We'll start with the Texas immigration. Talk a little bit about what's going on there in Texas.
Seth, that's right. Governor Abbott of Texas proposed, I don't know who proposed it, but signed the law, SB 4, which is a own Texas immigration law that I read the law, and it's an own immigration enforcement for Texas only. I don't believe that there's any congressional funds going into it. Now, I could be wrong. It didn't seem to me. It just, what I read it is completely different to what it's completely different to what happened in Arizona in 2012 with SB 1070. SB 1070 was an Arizona immigration enforcement law, but they were also there was a tie with cooperating with federal immigration authorities. Here in Texas, there is no such thing of that. Texas is enforcing immigration on their own accord now, and they are refusing to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. They're refusing to, accept any aid or any funds. So, like I said, that being said, I do see that it's a good idea. I've always advocated on my first book and in my writings that states have a right to enforce the immigration and especially the naturalization clause. They have done it before in the past, prior to 1942, and way even before, prior to 1875. So I think it's a good idea that states are doing it. My only concern is, Seth, is that they're playing politics. Because when Abbott was in the governor's mansion in Austin and Trump was in the White House, Abbott was kissing up to Trump simultaneously and not really enforcing his southern border, which again, I think it's Texas's border. It's not really America's border. It's Texas' border. The same thing with Arizona's border. The same thing with California's border. There is no American border. So these Trumpers that think this is an invasion, or Vivek Ramaswamy, that this is our southern border. No, Florida doesn't have a southern border. Florida has a Florida coastline. That's Florida's coast. That's Florida's border. So, to Vivek Ramaswamy, look into a map, please, to all those Trumpers and all those. So, what I was trying to say is that when Trump was in the White House and Abbott was there, they were kind of working together or letting Trump take the lead. And now that Trump's no longer there and Biden's there, there seems to be a little bit of, again, this word, tribalist politics. If you're not doing it, then I'm going to do it because you suck and I'm better and all this crapola. And, that's the problem that I have. I'm not denying the state's right to enforce the immigration and particularly the naturalization clause. I have a problem with how they're doing it, with playing politics. And here's another, just a brief parenthesis. Governor of Florida, my unesteemed governor of Florida, when he was deporting migrants from Florida and sent to Martha's Vineyard, that is playing politics. That's not what the founding fathers gave this power to the states to do. The founding fathers gave the power to the states to deport them to these person's place of origin. So that's also not a right thing to do, what DeSantis did 2 years ago or a year ago. So I do see a difference compared to Arizona. I think more states should nullify, and here's another word that many people don't realize, nullification. States have a right to nullify federal immigration law. So I think it's a good idea. I just don't think they should be playing politics with it.
Yeah, and that's, I've described the border stuff as theater. We'll go back to, a couple months ago when this was really heating up in the media, and, they were like drumming up the ideas of civil war with, Abbott versus Biden and the feds versus the state of Texas. And the thing was that, all the cameras were set up at this one location where there was wire being put up, and there were Texas agents, at the border. But there were people taking video less than a mile away showing the gate's wide open over here, and there's no Texas representatives over here. This is all theater. And I think both sides want this theater. They think it helps them politically, and that's all that really matters to them is what's best for us politically, and that's a big problem. And I agree with you about Texas. The states have the right to enforce immigration law, despite what the feds will say and what has been taught for a long time, that this is all federal jurisdiction. No, I agree that the states have jurisdiction to write laws, but what happens when we politicize these things like this? It leaves it open for people to have their rights violated. Like even if Texas has authority for this law, I worry about because it basically gives police the right to detain people who they suspect of having crossed the border illegally, which I'd want to know how exactly they're going to enforce this, because you can see them maybe pulling somebody over who looks Hispanic, and they might be an American citizen who didn't even cross the border. And claim they suspect them of coming in illegally. So there are things I worry about with this law, but do they have the right to enforce laws pertaining to immigration and the border? Yeah, I believe they do. But all of this stuff to me always seems like a distraction away from the real problem, which is all of the welfare and the handouts that American taxpayers are paying for people who come here illegally or legally. Or I have a problem with welfare in general, whether it's going to immigrants or born and raised Americans. So that's where the real problem lies, and nobody wants to touch that. Everything has to be about the border, and immigrants. And I'm saying, really, we need to get rid of the socialism in this country. That's that should be the focus. But instead, we get political theater, as we always get.
Yeah, three points of that set that you pointed. The first point that I'm going to talk about is the federal government still does have some responsibility to enforce. I mean, again, they can pass any acts of Congress, whether it's constitutional or not. The thing is that, states are going to say, okay, fine, you can, you pass this law in your Congress, that's fine. You can come to the state. We're not going to support you. We're not going to give you one shred of support or cooperation. So, in the old days, the federal government said, okay, well, we have to really look at this as priorities. If Texas doesn't want won't cooperate with us, then we'll go to California, and California will cooperate with us. Or then they'll change their financials and move on somewhere else. So I mean, the federal government, can enforce any aspect of it, but they're not going to get any support. And they did that in 1850 with the fugitive slave law, where Pennsylvania and Wisconsin said, you can pass that law. We're not gonna help you 1 inch of enforcing it because we don't believe it's a just constitutional law. But what my beef is that if Texas wants to pass a law, then let Texas enforce it with its own money. That's why I was strongly opposed with Trump's build a wall, because that's my Florida taxpayer money, that's your Illinois taxpayer money going to fund for a wall that's going to be on Texas soil. It's going to be a Texas infrastructure that I won't even see it. I won't even know. I'm never even going to cross by it. So why would I care? So that's my main beef is, if Texas wants to build a wall across that border, let it build it with its own funds. I don't want federal tax dollars going to mine. So that's the whole point of nullification, that, you can enforce that law, but we're not going to support it. We're not going to do anything with it. So, many people don't really understand what nullification is. And I really need to have people really understand that, this is something good. Now, to cooperate with federal authorities, see, this is something that people misunderstand also. And cooperate. For example, in 1996, Congress passed an Illegal Immigration Enforcement Act that created this type of program, 287G program, where local and state authorities cooperated with federal immigration authorities. And I'm like, whoa, this goes against the founding principles of sovereign states of this country. This really went against it. Where you have local and state, and by you, if local and state authorities cooperate with federal union officials, with federal immigration authorities, that's also because they're gonna give them, it comes with a price of, you help us here, we're gonna help you with rebuild this highway or rebuild this railroad or God knows, or this school or this aquarium or whatever. So it's a bargain blackmail chip. And that's even beyond unconstitutional. Not only that, states should not cooperate with federal immigration authorities. So, people don't value the Constitution, don't value reading founders' writings. Yes, I know, the founders' writings are not legal bounding documents, but yes, they are, because it's attached with the Constitution. So that's my other thing, is that states are not here to create alliances with the federal government to create like corporative acts. They're not, because it creates privilege. It creates a sense of entitlement that, oh, well, I'm helping, so give me my money and all that. No, that's not how it's supposed to do it. And then on the welfare tactic, yes, many Americans are not focusing on that situation. And to point out, me and Seth, we don't like welfare. We don't like this welfare situation for both citizens and non-citizens alike. But people need to understand that, in that sense that, they're just talking about, as Seth pointed out, border, immigrants. But what about the welfare that goes off to these illegals or legal citizens, for God's sakes? So, but again, it all goes back to the 16th Amendment, where Congress has the right to do this, and people are not willing to take a stand and stop it. So again, this is all playing politics, especially in election year. It's trying to see who's the better, who's the baddest, who's the cutest. And it's just really sickening that, they're playing politics with the Constitution.
Yeah, and that's just it always seems like a distraction to take our attention away from how our government is treating us, and just I view it as, if we had things running appropriately, we'd have a fairly easy process to come here legally, to enter in, whether to be to just visit America or come and work in America and become a citizen of America. It should be relatively easy, and I think I still think a lot of immigrants come to America looking for that American dream, even though I think it's turned into an American nightmare on what the American dream has become. It's not the land of liberty that our founders tried to create, but I think most immigrants are coming here for a better life and everything. I just so we should have a fairly easy process to come here. The problem is we're inviting everybody in to come in and gobble up all these so-called benefits that are paid for by taxpayers, and so it brings in a lot of people who might not be looking for liberty, but they're looking for a handout, which that's unfortunately what America has become, as a handout nation. It's whether immigrants or born and raised citizens, everybody's just everybody feels entitled. They feel entitled to a check from government if they can't find work, whatever it is. And this, I have this belief that, honestly, I'm entitled to nothing in life except what I work for. And we've lost that mentality. Everybody feels they're entitled to a roof over their head. They're entitled to food. They're entitled to health care. They're entitled to this, entitled to that. And that's where the problem lies. And instead we get distractions, we get political theater, and ultimately we get fear-mongering, and we get the tribalism that is unhealthy for a republic.
Yeah, and just before the show, Seth and I were talking about this illegal immigrant from Venezuela that he was boasting on TikTok in Spanish. And that's another thing, is that many immigrants that come here, they're not willing to adapt to the American way of life. They want to adapt to their standards, and that's another beef that I have, particularly here in South Florida. But I won't get to that. But this illegal from Venezuela boasting on TikTok that he's living off welfare, our taxpayers, and all that. I do believe that ICE found him in Ohio and arrested him. So I don't know if what's he up next. But it's this situation where that famous poem near Ellis Island, "Give me your poor, you're hungry, you're working class," and I forgot how else it goes. It's a nice bleeding heart poem. It's a nice poem, but it's really not a poem for America. Yeah, we'll accept people for religious persecution, as this country was targeted for religious persecution in the 1620s. We'll take it for political persecution, as this country was also in a political persecution during the Revolutionary War. But to accept somebody just because he's hungry or he needs whatever attention, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. And he or she needs to go through the process as they went through Ellis Island. Now, I know that people going through Ellis Island was a nightmare, because it was in charge of the federal government, and it's very sad. But one thing I like to point out is that the liberals, not really much the left, not really much the right, mainly the Trumpers, but the liberals, the left wing, they're saying that Texas SB or Arizona SB 1070 is a racist law and it's a bad law. And I'll get to your point about states violating rights. But, do these liberal jurists, do these liberal intellectuals realize that the majority of racist immigration law was passed by the federal government? You had in 1875 the Chinese Exclusion Act. You had in in the early 20th century a Japanese Exclusion Act. Hispanic Americans were treated, Mexican Americans were treated very harshly in California. So, do they realize that the majority of these, what about the executive order that came out of FDR to imprison Japanese Americans? These are acts not passed by the California legislature, not passed by the Texas or Arizona, but passed by its national Congress. So, before you start saying that SB 1070 or SB 4 is racist, look into the history behind it and see what the federal government has done and see which one is more racist. I think excluding Chinese from entering this country is racist. And the way that they were treated on the railroad, that's even more racist. So, that's one thing is this tribalism politics that they have no idea what they're talking about. They just want to blurt out everything just to make a point. It really makes me upset. And, with state officials arresting people, you're right. There has been incidents where in Arizona with Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, he has done a lot of inhumane things, arresting and imprisoning illegal immigrants. So they have to respect these people's rights. They're not citizens, but they have to respect their rights, not as citizens, but as human beings, as human citizens of this world. And yes, they're entering into our country, but you still have to respect them. So, you can't just arrest somebody just like that or abuse their power. So I know in Arizona, they had a type of provision in the law that they can question anybody without anything. And I think Texas does not. I'm not sure. But, cops have to know what they're doing and all that. And law enforcement have to know, who are they doing and make sure that they don't abuse that power on whoever it is.
Yeah, and I'd say, a lot of it comes down to how the enforcement parameters will be laid out. And, the way I would see it, the way I think it would be constitutionally viable and would not lead to violating of people's rights is that I don't think police should be able to just pull people over because they suspect them of crossing the border illegally. I think this should be if they pull somebody over or they stop somebody for a legitimate detainment, if somebody's speeding and within the process of going through the stop, they find out that the person they stopped came over illegally, then you have the right to detain. But, it comes down to enforcement. And, as we've discussed before, police don't have authority to just stop and question people. You need to be suspected of having committed a crime to be stopped and talked to by police. And so I worry about people just being stopped willy-nilly, kind of like stop and frisk, and it's something we don't want. We don't want this like authoritarian police state. So, with that, I don't know how this will get enforced. Again, to me, like we both said, it's political theater, so it might not even be enforced. It might just be something that Greg Abbott's saying, look what we're doing, and then they do nothing with the law. So that's probably most likely what's going to happen, because I don't think they really care about doing anything. They just care about winning political points for the election. So who knows how that's gonna turn out? But if you do enforce it, just remember people have rights, and don't just be stopping people for the sake of stopping them. You better have sound, legitimate reasons for stopping people.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Law enforcement has no right to stop you in any way, and they have to have some form of legitimate reason to stop you. And sometimes when I see a law enforcement officer pulled over a car, and whatever the driver's race it is, I wonder, did they pull him over legally? Did they have a reason? I sometimes, want to approach them and say, excuse me, I'm a paralegal or studying law. I want to make sure that you are following the law, but I don't want to get involved. But I sometimes want to act like a member of the ACLU and make sure that they don't violate that person's rights. But you're right. That's one thing that and again, you're right there. I think Abbott and Biden and Trump are playing politics, and especially Trump, playing politics to score points. So I think they're playing politics with the Constitution, and they're not using it correctly. They're not restoring it correctly to what the framers intended to, and that's what also kind of. I'm glad that if Texas is doing it, then Arizona should apply something similar, not SB 1070 like, but SB 4 like of Texas. And, with no cooperation from the federal government. You don't have to hold hands and say, okay, ICE, let's work together. No, you don't have to work together. So, Arizona, you don't have to cooperate you don't have to do this 287G proposal. You don't have to. I just think that people should really learn more, know more, and stop, from the left and the right, stop thinking this is a job for the federal government. It's not. This power is not entirely in the federal government's hands. It really is not. So, what Justice Anthony Kennedy said in his opinion for Arizona versus the United States, that the United States has undoubted power of immigration. No, it does not. Anthony Kennedy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So, know your writings. I encourage people to either buy my book, State Sovereignty, The Power Lies With Us, Not the Federal Government, or read Scalia's Dissent, and you will see my opinion and Scalia's opinion in all this. So that's my last thought about this is, states, you can do it without the help of the federal government, without any shred of financial aid from the federal government. So, start enforcing immigration and start respecting the law and respecting people's human rights, and we won't have any issues whatsoever. What's your final thought on this segment?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that states have a role, and they should not be afraid to try their own way on this. But always remember, people have rights, so don't go violating people's rights. And how about we stop giving free stuff to people? That's
another one. Yeah, good one.
The most important thing that we could focus on, and start doing things for the intentions of actually bettering society, and not to get your ugly mug on TV so that you can get elected. We need people of character and principle who are not in these positions for the sake of being part of the cult of personality, but people who actually want to defend liberty and, stop distracting us and giving us political theater, and start doing what's constitutionally allowed to be done, and do it for the right reasons.
Correct. And you're right. Stop the welfare on legal and illegal citizens. And so with that, the next segment, Seth, I know you read about this. I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Yeah, so Florida, Ron DeSantis and Florida Republicans have passed a new law, and DeSantis has signed it, basically banning children under 14 from having social media accounts, and It requires parental permission for children who are 14 and 15-year-old to have a social media account. And there are many real problems with this. Obviously stifling of First Amendment of children. Also another concern is this is going to lead to digital IDs, because people are going to have a digital ID to prove their age to get social media accounts in Florida. And ultimately what it comes down to me is authoritarianism is never the answer. And I personally believe that the crux of it, the idea that children shouldn't be on social media, I don't necessarily disagree. I think there is a problem with social media with the youth, and there's a lot of garbage on social media that if I were a parent, I wouldn't want my kids to have access to. But the point here is that's a parent's responsibility. It is not the government's responsibility. And like I said, this will lead to things like digital IDs. It opens the doors for all types of things we don't want. Anybody who wants liberty would not want. So again, authoritarianism is never the answer. And this is, again, DeSantis and the Florida Republicans showing their utter disregard for the First Amendment. They've had these hate crime laws and some other laws that I've seen that shows that the First Amendment is not really valued down in a Republican Florida.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, Florida has never really been a free state, a mind of liberty. Florida, unfortunately, has had really bad governors in the past, more in the future, and more at present time. And my main concern is that this is, the DeSantis and the Florida legislature acting like the parent. And they're not, I mean, maybe they are parents, maybe they have, and that's fine, but you don't have to put this in public view. You don't have to put this in a public law. If you want to take care of your kid, if you want to, if you want to control your kids' social media, then you do it on your own dime, your own time, but not on my time, not on my dime to control this. So what? They're gonna have a internet police patrolling this and waste my money on this? It's ridiculous. It's an invasion of privacy. It's an invasion of parental privacy and parental rights that I don't. It's funny how these right wing now acts. They want the government out of the homes, but only what they want. So they want government out of their health care, and that's fine. And they want the government out of their health care and the vaccines and all that. But when it comes to abortion, or when it comes to these things, or transgender parental rights, they want to get involved. How about the government don't get involved in the home unless there is any reason to get involved? Unless, that the parent is treating the child with malnourishment, is beating the child, you hear noises, then the government should step in and should find that. But yet again, we've had issues. For example, in California, you had a very young child, Gabriel Fernandez, that the parents were beating, the mother and her boyfriend were beating this child, were malnourishing this child, and the government didn't do anything. They just turned a blind eye. So is it really a good thing for the government to do these sort of things? I think government should just step away. And I think, it should be, I think the government should step away on these issues, because government's not the primary function of this. So when I read about this, I go, well, here we go again. Governor DeSantis, number one, ignoring the First Amendment. But to me, the most important part is number two, parental rights. You are ignoring the parents of hundreds of thousands of Floridians that, they want to control their children's however they want to control their children. I have no right to tell them how to raise their child just as much as they don't have a right to how to raise your child, DeSantis. So, it's that to me is an attack on the freedom of the parental rights, because, I remember an interview with Scalia that, he was talking about abortion, and, Pierce Morgan said, well, the founding fathers didn't have these issues before, because they're mostly male. And that Scalia says, what, they didn't have daughters? They didn't have friends that were females that had these probably issues? They dealt it in the homes. They dealt it and yeah, maybe they didn't take them to psychology because psychology was not a practicing thing, but, they dealt with it in the privacy of their homes. They didn't involve the government in these things. So I think this was a wrong bill. It's just more power grab from the state government of Florida into private citizens' lives. And I think it's way, way an encroachment of liberty here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me a little bit about the '90s and Tipper Gore and her efforts to censor music, and I think of John Denver was maybe the most powerful testimony to Congress. Now, John Denver did not have lyrics that any parent would be afraid of their kids listening to, but he sided with the First Amendment, and that's the real point here. Like I said, I think there are problems with children being on social media, but again, it's not the government's role; it's the parents' roles. And like back to Tipper Gore and censoring music. There's a lot of garbage music out there. There's a lot of bad lyrics. But it's up to parents to instill the values into their kids so that their kids don't want to listen to that music. And you're going to create this atmosphere where people want to hear those bad songs, what the government says you're not allowed to listen to. This law will create kids who maybe didn't want a social media account, but they're going to say, well, hey, the government says I can't join social media. Well, F you, I'm gonna join anyways. And this just is the wrong way to deal with this. And it all comes down to the lack and loss of principles in this country. That especially I see this a lot on the right, where they've just abandoned their principles. And I look at a lot of things that are going on in schools and these curriculum battles and everything, and I see a lot of conservative parents going to school board meetings really upset, and they're like, and they'll be saying, well, these are my kids, I'm the parent. Well, I'm sorry, you signed them into the government. You said, government, you educate my kids. There's the problem. The principle is that parents should be responsible for their kids' education, but instead they go to the government and say, hey, raise my child for me. But when you're not doing what I don't like, I'm going to say that you're encroaching on my parental rights. Well, you signed the paper that said government can raise your kids. And I'm not saying you're wrong on a lot of the issues. I think conservatives are right on most of these issues dealing with the schools, but you keep sending them back to the government. Well, when are you going to learn? Pull them out of the system. But that's a bigger battle that I've learned is nobody wants to hear.
No, and I'm glad you brought out the famous Tipper Gore fight against music. And yeah, you're right, John Denver, which his music is so soft and gentle and non-threatening, and yet he was the one that really spoke against that attack on the First Amendment. Also, Dee Snider. Also, I just want to bring up Dee Snider also spoke, and he came with his big hair from Twisted Sister and makeup. But once he spoke, he could, no senator, not even Al Gore, who was a senator in that committee, could even respond to his testimony because it was so brilliant. It was it was a defense of the First Amendment, and Congress cannot attack the First Amendment. The court, to this day, knock on wood, I know Kentucky Jackson did say a little bit scary thoughts about the First Amendment, but to this day, the Supreme Court has not brushed away the First Amendment. So it's very important that this amendment sticks in the Constitution, because it's really our life blood in this country, the First Amendment. And the other thing you mentioned, what was the last thing you mentioned, Seth?
Just generally about schools.
Oh, yeah. Principles. Yeah. Public education. I remember a good friend of mine from Montana. He was campaigning, and this liberal lady says, you're Jack Wells. You hate public education. And I go, no, I don't hate public education. But when you sign your kid going up to the steps of that public school, you lose all your rights. You don't have any rights. From 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., your kid belongs to the government. So you're right. If you don't want the kid to be involved in the government, then don't put him in public school. Either you teach him in homeschool, or you take him to a charter school or a private school. But you cannot. You can't have it both ways. And one thing I do have to agree, I know that Seth and I don't agree, is prayer in school. I don't believe that it should be prayer in public school. Or in private school it's different. As long as they don't receive any federal funds. If you receive federal funds, then they should not be invoking any prayer in class. But I do believe, the thing is that, we are so embedded, so indoctrinated in the government system that, then when it comes time, well, I don't like what you're teaching, or I don't like what you're teaching evolution, or this and that. That's another thing, is that, in Tennessee, you had a state law that banned the teaching of evolution and to support the teaching of creationism. Why couldn't you teach both? Why can't you teach both? And give the idea to the child to think it over and say, what do I believe? Do I believe in Darwin's theory that we came from monkeys, or that we came from Adam and Eve from the Bible? Plant that child that thought, that mind to grow and expand and see the world as the kid will see the world. But when you shut out that by the government, then you're going to create a lot of dismay and anger and rebellion that we don't want. So this thing with DeSantis, with this law, you're going to create a lot of dismay, a lot of anger, a lot of rebellion. And that's what happened with Tipper Gore, and it's really not good. So I hope the Supreme Court does take up this case, and I hope that they do overturn it, because it's not the role of any government, whether federal or state, to act like a guardian or a parent, because you're taking away that role. Your role is to make sure that child is grown up safe, nourished, treated with respect, and if there's any hint of abuse or violation, then that's where the government steps in. But for this is not an abuse or violation. This is just for control. So my last thought in this is that I think this is a blatant abuse of control and wanting to set their standards to set this control of a government in action, a police state. And I don't believe that, this is a just law. And I hope that either gets repealed or overturned.
Yeah, it's again, the simple opposition to it is that authoritarianism is not the solution to any of our problems. Liberty is the solution to our problems. And, again, if you're a parent and you don't want your child to be on social media, which I would tend to agree with you on that, it's up to you to raise your kids right and, to monitor their online activity and, just stop looking for the government to solve your problems, because what happens is we get a whole host of new problems on top of it. And this should be resoundingly rejected by anybody who believes in liberty and Again, there's something in the water down in your neck of the woods. I mean, I can't really say too much. I'm from Illinois. We have a whole problem here too, but it really bothered. I mean, I live in a Democrat state, so I expect them to hate my rights. But the Republicans who love to preach about liberty, and yet they are the ones doing the same thing the Democrats do, that really bothers me. It really bothers me when, Kristi Noem in South Dakota just signed and was proud to sign a new hate crime law in South Dakota.
Oh,
and nobody's, and none of the conservative media has a problem with it. No. And it's like, it bothers me that the hypocrisy of it just is disgusting.
I mean, Florida, unfortunately, is the Bible Belt or part of the Bible Belt. Yet again, I would say North Florida is the Bible Belt. South Florida is the Hispanic authoritarian part of the country, where they love to have, the majority of here are Cuban Americans, so they would love to have a Batista, or Venezuelans, they love to have a Chavez, but on the right side. So they do have that sense of, authoritarianism. And with the Bible Belt, I mean, they've, the majority of states that favor to control the liquor production were mostly from the South. Tennessee, the Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and yet, those were the legislature that affirmed the 18th Amendment, but yet they had bootleggers and they had moonshiners in those states breaking the law, and even the own law was breaking the law. So you're right, the hypocrisy is unbearable when they play these politics games, these tribalist games that is so stupid. And Illinois probably plays some games like that in Midwest America, Indiana as well. So it's these tribalist politics games. It's enough is enough. Just give us our liberty, give us our freedom. And one last thought, here in Florida, DeSantis said that he doesn't like the new abortion. I'm going to register to vote tomorrow, but there's a abortion restriction. Abortion rights a referendum, and also a recreational marijuana for use, and he thinks it's wrong for the state. One last point. Doesn't he know the 9th Amendment? That's our rights. There's certain rights that belong to the people. Those are one of them. I know, Seth, you disagree with abortion. I understand. It's different reasons, but it's still our individual rights. There's a reason why the 9th is before the 10th, and there's a reason before that, because Jefferson and Madison believed in individual rights first, then come state powers, then come federal government powers. So I encourage my Floridians to vote on those two constitutional referendums, because they're your rights. It's individual rights, and they should not be trampled by any government. So, but again, in my last statement, and let's Seth do a final statement. Seth, what do you think of on that notion of individual rights should not be trumped by neither state or federal?
Well, we have to understand that the right's not the power is not granted to the federal government. Rest in the states and the people's hands. And we can have some disagreements on some of these things, like the marijuana. I'd be supportive. I'm opposed to the drug war. I think drugs should be decriminalized, if not legalized. Abortion, I view it as murder, so I will have a disagreement with you on that. Mm-hmm. But I don't have a problem with there being referendums, because we want to know where the people stand on these issues and how we deal with it. And no matter what the issue is, most of the issues should be decided by the people. I mean, we should be free to live our lives the way we see fit, and the laws should be. This is the big problem is we have so many laws. I want far fewer laws. The laws should be based on, whether or not you violated somebody else's rights. So, if there's no victim, there's no crime. And, like I said, with abortion, I think there's a victim. And that's why I think there's a place for the government to step in. But but ultimately, that's a state. We need to also recognize that law enforcement is a state issue, not the federal. I do not want the federal government involved. We need to really discuss these issues more and about and understanding what is and is not the government's authority. And for the most part, the government has been way outside of its bounds of authority, and they don't even, where they do have authority, they don't even do their job. So that's we need to have more discussions about the issues and what is government authority instead of the tribalist cult of personality discussions that the media wants to foist on us.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely right. I mean, I know that, we're not going to agree on abortion, which is fine. I mean, we agree to disagree, and we can have this great debates. And on marijuana, I strongly encourage that it should be decriminalized and legalized. All drugs, I mean, they legalize morphine. Morphine is a drug, and yet morphine is not as potent as heroin, but it's a drug. And yet they legalize morphine, but they're criminalizing heroin. It makes no sense. So I do believe in that, and that will bring away the drug war and the DEA. So that's another discussion. But let's think about individual rights, your parental rights on immigration. States have that right, not people. So that's a state right issue, and let's hope that other states follow suit, like Texas. And with that being said, we wish you a great week ahead. We'll come back on Sunday, and we'll have yourself a great night.
Good night.